All right. So we have an amazing topic today. Love addiction and co-addiction and avoidance and all kinds of amazing things that Peeling the Onion has to offer, and so does Heidi. And Heidi is Phoenix, Arizona is the birthplace of Coda, and Heidi is an amazing member of our fellowship that has done so much work for us on the events committee in years past, has been a workshop presenter around the world, and we just want to, from our hearts, just give Heidi a loving, warm welcome and blessing to come back on here to do your workshop for us on your experience, strength, and hope with Peeling the Onion and love addiction. Heidi, welcome.
I'm Heidi, I'm codependent. It's so weird to talk to dead air. I guess I just want to start by getting right-sized and saying that I'm really nervous. I can feel my heart beating, my hands are sweaty. I have some shame, or rather some fear of shame. This is a very sensitive topic for me, and I'm going to do my best to be transparent with you guys and honest about my story. You know, it's still in the healing process, because otherwise I probably wouldn't feel so nervous about sharing, you know. But I know that fear is not real, and that you guys are my people, and that if you have any judgment, that that's really about you, and that I have, you know, every right to my story and my opinion about it, and my process in healing it and coming to understand it. So those are boundaries that are important for me to have for me. But overall, I know how loved and supported I am in the rooms of Coda, and that I'm not alone. You know, I mean, clearly there's 192 people in here. So sorry, you guys, but we're all in this together. So just to give you, you know, first I want to say that my experience, strength, and hope is mine. I come by it through, in 2 weeks, I'll have 12 years in Coda. So I've been doing this work for a while, and, but it's still my own journey, my own opinions, my own understanding of the steps, my own understanding of co-addiction, love addiction, relationship stuff, you know. And so I just want to encourage everybody to have boundaries and take what you want and leave the rest. And that hopefully the content that we're going over today will have some useful value for you in your recovery and your healing process. Just to give you an overview, I'm gonna share my story first and get that the hell out of the way. And then you guys are going to do your work. And what we're going to do is do some reading out of Peeling the Onion, and you guys to identify some of your own love addiction and love avoidance. And basically that, we're going to call that step one. We're going to touch on some step one stuff around everybody's own love addiction and love avoidance, intimacy issues. And then we're going to take we're going to do breakout rooms for people to share on that. Christina had shared that it was going to be one-on-one breakout rooms, but I think we're doing 4 people in a room instead of one-on-one. So anyway, when we get there, then you'll get some more instruction about that. And then we're going to take a little break and come back and work on some step 2 stuff, and again do some of your own personal work and do some breakout rooms. And then we're going to go on and do some step 3 stuff as well. So we hope to cover steps 1, 2, and 3. You know, obviously not as thorough as you could or hopefully will with your sponsors or your own support group, but it's really important to me to bring this stuff back to the steps, because that's really the meat and potatoes of where healing happens, and where change happens, and where surrender happens. So that's been my journey. So I'm going to start out by reading a little bit out of Peeling the Onion. There's the book. And this is the introduction on page 3 for those of you that want to follow along who might have your pamphlet with you. In order to gain a deeper understanding of our codependency, we look inward, continuing the emotional work of peeling the onion. The onion represents the pain of our childhoods and the realization of how this has adversely impacted the very fiber of our lives. Our goal is to gently arrive at a new level of understanding of the pain we still carry, but have not yet been recovered enough to approach until now. We begin by redefining our codependency. At an emotional level, we need to overcome the childhood trauma that drove our authentic selves into hiding in order to survive. To comprehend what it means to have been a totally helpless infant, dependent on emotionally inappropriate or unavailable parents, we consider the relationships with our primary caregivers. We come to realize that we were groomed to meet their needs. Some of us took on the shame of our caregivers, including mirrored feelings of disgust toward our bodies and bodily functions. We experienced control and objectification through language, innuendo, enmeshment, and/or abandonment. Peeling the layers is necessary due to the intensity and depth of this betrayal. By opening our hearts, we begin the process, this time moving from self-contempt to compassion for ourselves. The process requires us to be willing to let go of all the ways we use to cope. Instead, we use and value the tools we have learned in CODA recovery, the patterns and characteristics of codependence, the 12 steps, a sponsor, a home group, and our higher power. In recovery, we learn to detach from the past and develop awareness of new options for our lives. Powerful stuff. On the next page, on page 5, I'm going to read one of the second paragraph there. At CODA meetings, we often hear people talk about other addictions: alcohol, drugs, exercise, food, gambling, spending, work, etc. During the recovery process, as we examine our behaviors, many of us discover addictions to love, sex, and relationships. Common denominators include control, intensity, drama, distorted thinking, and emotional immaturity. These manifest as addictive and/or avoidant behaviors. At the root of all of these behaviors is the absence of intimacy with ourselves, our higher power, and others. Through examining the patterns and characteristics of our codependence on a deeper level, we peel back more and more layers of the onion. As we explore, we gain insight. We may experience tears of pain, relief, discovery, regret, and joy. Okay. I can't avoid it anymore. I'm an avoidant. So I'm gonna share my story. And I want to be conscious of time, so I need to pay attention to how long I go for. It is 1:30, and well, it's 1:30 here. So we're gonna go till 2. And so I'm gonna ask for a 5-minute warning from the committee. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm Heidi, I'm codependent still. And, you know, it's so interesting that, I guess first I wanna say that when I was sitting in a CODA meeting 12 years ago, when I first got here, and some, you know, and I didn't have any familiarity with the literature or anything, and somebody said, oh, let's read Peeling the Onion, because my home group does literature study as part of the format. You know, I was pretty blown away by it, and I was like, oh, that's so, it brought up so many yucky feelings. It was just yucky, you know. And I've come to understand that yucky for me now means shame, and like shitty or yucky is my teenager's language for shame. Or fucked up, that's another one that, you know, it's like, oh, there's probably shame about that. But I hated this pamphlet. I mean, I just hated it. I would leave the meeting at the end of the night and just feel that gross, you know, I don't know, I felt offended. I felt almost violated by the reading, and how vulnerable it all was, you know, saying it out loud. It was stuff that you shouldn't be saying out loud, you know. And I've since come to understand that that, you know, that's just how much work I had to do. And it's absolutely important for us to talk about it out loud, especially in a safe environment like this. And so that's, you know, that's why I'm going to share my story, is because you know, other people had the courage to share their story with me and share the ugly parts and the vulnerable parts, and not just be vague, but rather to be specific. You know, so I hope to be able to share my story without an attachment to you guys, you know, seeing me as a hero or seeing me as a victim or, you know, any of that. I just want to, I'm just Heidi, and I'm just a codependent, you know, and I've done what I've had to do in order to survive my life and the shame that I've been carrying. And so did my parents, you know, and so have my partners, you know. So that's the right sized, that's how I get right sized around some of that stuff, and not in a one up or one down around it. So you know, I grew up in a home where there was an intense amount of active addiction going on, which really means codependence. You know, active addiction, from my understanding, is about medicating codependence. And codependence is about medicating shame. And so that's just how I've learned to sort of simplify it in my head. There was a lot of shame in my family. My mom and dad both come from very shame-based families. And so my dad was an alcoholic, active alcoholic, workaholic. Both my parents were workaholics. My dad was a sex addict and a rage addict. And he also was, you know, a fantasy addict. And that showed up in a lot of love addiction for him. He also was a love addict. And even in his business life, in his business and sort of entrepreneurial pursuits, very much in fantasy around all that stuff. So a lot of addiction medicates, you know, so it's all about medicating. Mom, very codependent, had big fantasy family, you know, family fantasies, I guess, you know, about being the perfect mom and everybody being happy and making everybody feel good about themselves. And, you know, so, you know, that was, and she also had some religious addiction that came in from being raised Mormon, that she introduced into our family. Mom was a food addict. And then in a chronic state of trying to fix that with diet addiction. My mom was a survivor of molest, so she had a lot of sexual shame, and a lot of, they talked in the reading that I just did, you know, about, I don't know what they called it, but like body self-loathing and stuff like that. So, so yeah, that kind of sums it up, you know, just a lot of addiction, a lot of codependence, a lot of fantasy, a lot of, you know, a lot of crazy. And so having been born into this, you know, with these parents that are just in continuous states of cycling in and out of medicating feelings, medicating shame, trying to keep this family afloat, you know, trying to each of them, you know, achieve what they needed to achieve. And, you know, just, it was just so much survival. There was a lot of abuse. I was abused verbally, emotionally, sexually, physically, and intellectually. You know, the ways that the world was painted to me were very distorted. You know, which really was my introduction to everything, you know. But I think when it comes to love addiction, that what I watched was my parents' intensity and the, you know, the raging at each other. Dad was violent sometimes. There wasn't a lot of violence, but those violent times definitely stick out to me. So I know there's trauma around that impacted my thinking and my belief about safety and about what people owe to each other and what people should and shouldn't do and to stay under the radar, and how to don't be like that or else, and so there was, it was just a very scary, toxic environment. My dad was a tyrant. He would continuously cycle in and out of, rage and blaming everybody for his misery and his unhappiness, and how he was so used, and how he didn't matter to us, and how selfish we were. And then he'd get drunk and tearful and beg us to show up and try harder to keep the house clean and be kind and stop fighting and stop being so selfish. And so, Dad pulled us into this emotional roller coaster. There was 5 of us girls. I'm number 2 out of 5. And he would just completely take us down these roller coasters of emotional tyranny, where we were blamed for everything, and then we were promised amazing happiness forever if we would just get on board, and if we would just try harder. And so, that was of course him in his fantasy addiction, trying to build another fantasy that I can get all these people to change and meet my needs. I can get all these kids and my wife to stand behind me, and he had no idea he's this little boy with a shit ton of shame, and he's really just asking us to stop triggering him. He doesn't even know what any of that looks like, so he needs us to change, and he needs to unload all this shame. So he, of course, spreads it all over us, and we're just little kids with no boundaries. We just soak it in, completely soak it in. It's all my fault. I'm such a bad girl. I'm so mean. I'm so selfish. It's so wrong for me to want things. It's so wrong for me to want their time or to want to be loved. With the workaholism that my mom and dad were in, there was very little parenting going on. It was more like we just got raged at when we did things wrong and threatened, and things taken away from us. So there wasn't like those that let me show you how to do that. There was a lot of figure it out. What the fuck's wrong with you? Hurry up. You did it wrong. Give me that. Let me just do it myself. So that was parenting in my home. If we even got that half the time, so, God loved my parents. They did the best they could, and it was bad. I mean, they really did a shitty job. And I understand that they did that was all they had. But boy, did I come out of that with some really mixed up messages about what family is, about what love is. I remember my dad saying things in his, raging tirades about, you guys don't love me. This isn't love. If you loved me, you'd do what you're told. You'd do, in just so much victim raging and martyrism and just, character assassination for me and my sisters. And, that stuff started when I was like 6, I didn't know what was coming at me. I had no way to defend myself in my head. So what started really young for me was fantasy. Reality was not acceptable. I mean, the reality that I was living in, it has taken me my whole life to figure out what that reality was, and to heal it enough to be able to talk about it and to feel compassion for myself and to understand what was happening, but there's no way I could tolerate that kind of pain. There's no way that I could tolerate the reality of being treated like that and raged at and being fearful of my safety. And shame is such a debilitating, painful experience, especially from your caregivers who are your gods at that time, that all I could do was just go into fantasy, and so the fantasies were, for me, they were, I can change, I'll be good. I'll do it right. I'll fix it. I'll be perfect. I'll be better. I'll get good grades. I'll clean my room. I'll be nice. I'll care about others, and then I would make up this big story about how perfect I was going to be, and, you know, and start chasing that drug, you know, and it would medicate the feelings right now and here. And then I'd have some effort towards it, like, okay, I'll go clean my room, you know, and then obsessive compulsively clean my room, or, you know, just impulsively, you know, do that to fix my shame, you know, and my fear, and to be enough, you know. But, you know, but ultimately, shame-based change always leads to neglect for me, because it feels ugly. You know, it doesn't, it's not attractive to do the right thing when shame is driving it. So then the neglect comes back in, or the avoidance comes back in, where I don't want to clean my room. I want to do something that makes me feel better, you know. My dirty room is just a point of shame, because that's what my parents have created it to be, because of the way that I've been raised at, you know. So my dirty bedroom, that, you know, that I need to go clean it. God, I need to go clean it. I need to go clean it. I really should be cleaning it. I'm so bad. I can't believe, you know. And you just know the clock is ticking in the back of your mind, and that sooner or later you're going to get raged at, you're going to get in trouble, you know. And it's like that, instead of go do it, there's that procrastination and that avoidance, and you just, you know, because there's that shame there. It's like your room is just this shame thing, this shame ball. You're just like, oh no. And so procrastination, perfectionism and procrastination, and, you know, vacillating between those two started for me very young with this fantasy addiction, and the trying to control myself, and the trying to control how they saw me. So it was just craziness, you know, and I did that with grades, and I did it with food and dieting, and I did it with cleaning, housework. I did it with friendliness. You know, and I started patterns like that with my friends, you know, I mean, it just, like, fantasy addiction became my whole life, you know, which in there is people pleasing and all that stuff. And so, you know, really what we're talking about is, you know, so then enter love addiction. Okay, so I'm getting raged at, and one of the ways that I medicated that is, you know, my dad is like hurting me, right? And I'm just in that particular scenario, you know, I'm being raged at and told that I'm selfish, and I'm mean, and I'm stupid, or I'm whatever. And so, you know, somebody just hurt me pretty deeply. And one of the ways that I medicated that was to feel sorry for my dad, you know, and I would make up a story about, yeah, he hurt me, but he doesn't mean to. He doesn't mean it. You know, it's my fault. You know, I did this to him. So then I'm villainizing me, and I'm victimizing him. You know, so the story might go, he's really just trying to help me. He's really just trying to help me because I'm just so selfish. And, you know, I do this to him, and he just can't help himself. You know, and this is a little girl trying to medicate her feelings with this fantasy and make it okay that, like, I live with this tyrant. I cannot run away. I cannot escape from. I can't change him. I can't make him different. So I'm just going to make up a story, and it fixes how I feel. And it allows me to love him. It allows me to tolerate being treated this way. And the side of the damage that causes is that I'm in self-abandonment. I'm blaming me for his behavior. And then I have to create a story that I can change, because I'm really the villain. So now I have to, you know, now I can make up that perfect fantasy story that I'm going to change. I'm going to do better. I'm going to work harder at it. So this is my fantasy addiction. And really the root of my love addiction is making up stories about people. And the story medicates my feelings right now. It fixes my shame right now. But in the long run, I'm just in denial. I'm in blatant denial. I'm in extravagant denial. And the more damage that somebody's causing me, the greater the stories have to get, because addiction is progressive, right? So in my alcoholism and drug addiction, you know, I used to just get high on Friday nights, you know, and then after a while it progresses, and then it's Friday and Saturday. And then after a while, you know what I mean? And then pretty soon you're using every day all the time. Okay. Or however long that takes for that to happen. But addiction is progressive. And the same thing is true with fantasy addiction. The fantasies have to get bigger and greater and more profound. You know, my mom my mom and dad both taught me how to fantasy, how to use fantasy to fix feelings. My mom had tons of fantasies around the Mormon religion. I'm not attacking the Mormon religion. I'm just saying how that was expressed to me and used, in my family to medicate codependence. And, the story was that if we do things now and do it right now and sacrifice and, stay true and stay faithful and we're committed and dedicated and obedient, that then, there's the drug. Okay, that then, we're going to have eternity in heaven with, God and be the chosen children. So like better than the other ones, right? Which there's a big one up, big medicator for a codependent like me. And then we'll be able to have everything we want forever. Like there's not a better drug than that, So for a fantasy addict anyway. So, fantasy addiction was taught to me, how to make up stories to fix how you feel right now and how to use fantasy addiction to self-abandon, how to use fantasy addiction to deprive yourself of what you really need and want right now in your life, how to deny how your feelings are hurt, how to deny how powerless you are over others' behavior, abuse, treatment, etc. So, I ran with that. And so I learned how to put these stories on people about, like mom and dad really just want the best for me. And I became love addicted to my parents, and I'm going to call it love addiction. And then after they would rage, then this anger would come up in me, like, especially if it wasn't fair, because I started getting older, and then the hypocrisy really drove me crazy, and so then I'm going into, the villainizing them, where like me and my sisters are getting together and we're like, oh, that's not fair. They never clean their room. They never, whatever. They always this and they always that. And then we're just like, criticizing them. They're asking too much from us. None of our friends ever have to do these things. And then I'm putting this picture on them, or, creating a story about them, like how mean they are and how vicious parents they are. And they just don't even care about us. And, and they're never here for us and they never do anything. And while some of that might be true, it was medicating because I'm in a one-up. I'm not in authentic power. I'm not in authentic the truth about it. I'm not, I can't. I'm a kid and I'm pretty powerless. There's really nothing I can do. So this is where I started this cycle of putting the positive on people in order to medicate my feelings, and then putting a negative on them in order to medicate my feelings. And I started with my mom and dad, and then it just blew up in my life, and it pretty much just did it to everybody. And very convincing. When I'm in that reality, well, not reality, when I'm in that not reality of glorifying somebody in my life and pumping them up into somebody who they're not, it is absolutely the truth to me. I am high as a kite, running with it. It is amazing. And and they are so awesome, and they walk on water, and I assign all this value to them that is extravagant and unrealistic. But then when I'm villainizing them, I am ripping them to shreds. I am like taking them down to the core. Like they have lost all their humanity to me. And, all that is me medicating with my own body energy. It has nothing to do with them. I'm just medicating shame. I'm working my way up into a big one up over here, and then a big one down over here, and is happening. And then I got to work myself up into a big one up with the negative story in order to medicate. So it's like positive, negative, positive, negative. Now, so you can see why I might have trust issues. Because I have done this my whole life and assigned people such extravagant levels of hero and villain, and to a point where I couldn't trust me anymore. because I'm so sure of it when I'm in that fantasy worship, and I'm so sure of it when I'm in that fantasy villainization, you know? So fast forward a few years, and then crushes start happening for me when I'm, you know, in elementary school and junior high, and same thing with boys, you know, same thing with friends. Um, you know, giving people all these qualities that we're that were just to medicate me, you know, and then the fantasy story of how I might get with that person, or how they might like me, or how they might whatever. And then when I come down from that story, then I villainize them because they're really not all that. I never really wanted them to be my friend anyway, or I never really liked him that much anyway, you know. And they don't even know about this. This is all happening in my own head, in my own little private world, in my own little fantasy story, in my own little codependent bubble. You know, they don't even know about this. Eventually, some of that comes out in relationship, but half the time or more, all of this is just happening in my system as I'm using this to manage my shame, manage my fear of being seen, manage my fear of intimacy, manage my fear of rejection, manage my fear of abandonment, of being left out, of not being enough. Powerful medicators. I'm sure I'm the only one that does this. Let me see. Let me check on time. Oh God, I talk so much. So when my dad started molesting me, he started grooming me for molest when I was 13. I was already well into my fantasy addiction. And, you know, and I already had fantasies in my head that I would make up all the time about, like, oh, someday I'll meet this boy and whatever. Oh, maybe it's him. Oh, maybe it's him. Oh, maybe it's him, you know. But you know, when my dad started grooming me, and his sex addiction started paying attention to me because I was developing, and he started giving me more attention and positive attention instead of all the, you know, instead of all the raging and the character assassination and judgment. I was so hungry for my dad's attention and his, what I thought was love, you know, or even just tolerating me, that I like absolutely sucked it up. And I just was like a little puppy dog that followed him around everywhere and just idolized everything he did. And so, you know, so he milked that, you know, and then eventually, you know, manipulated me into having a sexual relationship with him. And, you know, my body was appalled. My emotions were, you know, it was traumatic for me to, I mean, yeah, obviously it was very traumatic for me to try to, it went so far against my Mormon upbringing, to have sex with my dad. I was betraying my mother. I felt horrible about myself. I felt horrible for him. You know, I didn't know what to do, but one of the things that was really powerful that I used was he made up a story that him and I were soulmates and that God had switched me and my mother. And I bought it, you know, and it wasn't that unlike some of the other fantasy stories that were very alive in my family around Mormonism and other things. So that was, you know, that was a fantasy, a love addiction fantasy that I used to medicate that, like, my dad's molesting me. I'm a gross person. This hurts. I'm afraid all the time. I'm terrified of being caught. I'm terrified I'm going to go to hell, you know. I'm terrified that I'm going to break my mother's heart and she's going to kill herself. I mean, just huge things that like a 13, 14-year-old has no business having to manage or deal with. And what was I going to do, right? You know, so I did what I knew how to do. That was a powerful drug that I used during that time. And and also a lot of alcohol because my dad was an alcoholic. So I had access to alcohol. So I drank every day. And I was in a continuous cycle of fantasy addiction with my dad. We're meant to be together. He loves me so much. It's not his fault. He doesn't mean to hurt me. I can't hurt him by telling him that I'm not sure if I love him or not. Keeping that stuff a secret. And then the villain mask that I put on my mother to medicate my shame around cheating on her with dad and, stealing her husband. I didn't steal anything, but, my perception of it at the time was that I was responsible and that I was wrong. I didn't see myself as a victim. And there was very careful grooming for a very long time to make sure of that. And I was codependent as a child. I chronically thought everything was my fault. So of course I would think this was my fault too. So that was, that's how my fantasy addiction was. Thank you. Was formulated. And, I went on to, use that addiction. Actually, that addiction is one of the ways that, well, probably the way that I was able to escape that, that situation, when I was 19. So I was molested from age, like 14 to 19. The grooming started when I was 13, but the molest started when I was 14. And then it didn't end until I was 19. And there was a guy in my life at work, who ended up being my first husband. And I got a big crush on him. I hid it from my dad. I really hid it from the boy too. And, but I started medicating on that every single day. I would medicate on how much I liked him, how cute he was, how sweet he was, how he had this normal life, I don't know. I just made up all kinds of stuff about him. And, just assigned all this amazing value to this person. Not that he's not an amazing person, but assigned all this value to him and wanted him so bad, and then tried to manipulate my dad to end the relationship. And then finally it all blew up and I escaped and I hooked up with this guy, and then what happened was he was just who he was, and fast forward a few years, we got married, we had a kid. I did a lot of therapy because, like, obviously I was a basket case at that time. I just had so much trauma and confusion, but I was still full of shame. I was still full of shame. And this guy who was really this drug for me, the drug stopped working. The love addiction story of Heidi and Nick, it stopped medicating me, and I blamed him. And so now he's not enough. Now he's not doing life right. He's not planning our lives right. He needs to go back to college. He needs to be more organized. He needs to be a better, so I became avoidant. And, and I had no idea I was medicating all of this trauma that's still inside me. My inability to be intimate and trust, my inability to truly feel connected to another person. I just have this hole inside me that, that I don't know what to do with. He used to be the drug that filled it. Now it's clearly his fault. He's not doing it anymore. And so I start the endeavor to change him, which is exactly what my parents did, absolutely following in their footsteps, that, like, if you'll change, I'll feel better. Right. So in my avoidance with him, I'm constantly making up stories of how, he's wrong. He's, I'm villainizing him, pushing him away, keeping him at arm's length. At the end of that marriage, which we were married for like 8 years, I think, I got a love addiction crush on a coworker, and same scenario. of course I'm in active addiction all that time too, with alcoholism. And so, you know, same scenario where I'm assigning all these values to this guy at work, and his name's Henry, and he walks on water, and I'm villainizing my husband. And, you know, and I'm in my head, I'm making up this fantasy life that me and Henry are going to have, and how we're going to raise our sons together, and how I'm going to mean so much to him, and how I'm so much better than the girlfriend that he has right now. And all the story just keeps on going, and I'm medicating until I finally take action around it. I cheat on Nick. That goes nowhere. He turns out to be a guy, you know, and, you know, and I broke Nick's heart. I devastated our marriage. You know, I was in a ton of shame. I was, you know, also medicating all that with drugs. And, you know, that was the time in my life when I started using hard and using illegal drugs. You know, love addiction on drugs is just, is bad. You know, you can convince yourself of all kinds of crazy shit. I was a meth addict. Okay. And so, you know, I was off and running, and ended my marriage, and continued to blame him. You know, he never really, you know, just whatever stories I could make up, you know, it's all his fault, whatever. And I'm moving on, and, you know, I'm going to find someone right for me, because there is that drug out there, because people are drugs from where I grew up. You know what I mean? Like what I'm taught is people are drugs. You just have to find the right one. And that's not the language I knew then. It's just how I've come to translate it today, to know that, you know, people are not drugs. I am not a drug. I never should have been a drug. I wasn't, that was not God's purpose for me on this planet, and not for any one of us. We are not drugs. We are people. We deserve to be honored and loved and respected, and treated kindly, and have rights. And that is stripped from us when we have caregivers or people in our lives who demand that we fix them, you know, and fix their shame. We're not just shame fixers, you know. So then I found another drug of choice, and his name is Ken, and he became my second husband eventually. And that is the story that got me to Coda. That was the worst bottom I've ever experienced. You know, we used together in active addiction. I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous. 2 years later, he got clean in Narcotics Anonymous. You can imagine what I did with that fantasy story. You know, if you're a fantasy addict, you'll see how enticing that would be. You know, oh my God, we overcame addiction, and you know, so it just, like, again, escalating. And then when his addictions all came out, and the rug got ripped out from underneath of us, you know, 10 years later, I was absolutely devastated. I wanted to kill myself. You know, I had escalated that fantasy addiction to a point where there was just nowhere else to go. There was no more getting high to fix it. I could not make up a story in my head that would medicate that level of shame, because I had become so shameless in that fantasy. It was the epitome. There wasn't any higher that you could get from the story that I made up about me and Ken. And, you know, the soulmate story, you know, how we found each other in active addiction, how we're going to we had a daughter, we have a daughter, and, you know, how we're going to raise her right. And, you know, just all that was going to fit, you know, I didn't know this was all medicating my child abuse and all that shame that I'd had for years, you know, the fantasy story that I made up about the lives and the family that we were going to be. And so when all that fell apart, I was in withdrawal for about 3 or 4 years of my first, the beginning of my Coda recovery. And it wasn't like withdrawal and then stop, you know, it was like slowly I came out of withdrawal around that. As I was also doing a lot of my family of origin work and coming to the truth about my child abuse, which I thought I had left behind years and years ago, because I did therapy in my 20s, you know. But, you know, the truth was that I just had so much shame, and that I just learned how to medicate it so well with fantasy. And you know, I think that's about all I'm going to share, because I'm 5 minutes over our time anyway. But that feels like a yucky place to leave it. Ew. So I'm gonna continue on a little bit and say that I have been in 2 relationships in recovery. I spent my first 6 years single, working on myself in Coda. Just telling you guys my timelines doesn't mean that something works or doesn't work. Everybody has their own path. I needed that time for me. I spent a lot of it in rage, working hard on myself, but I could not break the rage. Still in a tremendous amount of one-up to fix that shame. Didn't help, though, I gotta say. Thank God for sponsorship and therapy and the rooms, you know. And when I did start to date, I've had a couple of relationships, and both with amazing men who are in recovery, and had just some fabulous healing through those relationships. I've learned how to love myself. I've learned how to real love other people. I don't do it perfectly, for sure, but I know how to own my part. I know how to, and I know, especially from the first relationship I had in recovery, I was able to identify my love addiction a lot. I worked the steps a few times in that relationship on love addiction specifically, so that I can understand the stories I'm making up, how I'm plugging into him, how I'm in self-abandonment, and how I put those stories on him and I don't really see him. And that is so unfair to do to another human being. It's just not fair. And it's not even about them. It's about me. It's about my shame. It's about my fear of intimacy. It's about my avoidance. So, you know, what I can say today is that, like, I have a beautiful heart. I love my heart. I'm still a work in progress. You know, people matter to me today. They're not just a drug for me to use to medicate my shame. My job is to take care of my little girl and teach her that she's valuable and lovable, and that she's safe with me. You know, my love addiction, or I guess it's not love addiction, but that incredible, intense love that I thought I was gifting people with, that was really fantasy, you know, is reserved for her. She is the one in my life that gets that unconditional, I will, you know, walk through glass for you, honey. I will be with you until the end of time. No matter what, your feelings matter, your experience matters, your heart matters to me, your well-being matters to me. And that is reserved for her and her alone. You know, everyone else I have to have different layers of boundaries with, you know, even my own children. But myself, it's not like I don't have boundaries with me, but that level of unconditional sort of spiritual love is reserved for my, you know, my inner child, because I am the one that's responsible for her. And I love that. I love my little girl. I take care of her every day. I do the best that I can. She's healed so much in this 12-year Coda journey, and she's still healing, and she's still finding out new things, and she's just such a joy in my life. She has brought the joy back to my life. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you guys for listening to my story. I hope that it's been helpful to help you get in touch with your stories. And that you're ready to do some work. And so I'm going to go ahead and take a breath. Let me get back in my grown up here. That's a lot. That's a lot, guys. Thank you.